The basic unit. A close look at words. How many words are there in one? The cook was a cook. The cook was a good cook. As cooks go and as cooks go, she went. It probably didn't take you very long to come up with the answer. 15. And think about how you arrived at that answer. What you did, in effect, was to count the items which appeared between spaces on the page. We could say that a word is a unit which, in print, is bounded by spaces on both sides. We will call this an orthographic word, because it is linked to the spelling orthography. In practice, we may not always feel certain just where words begin and end in the written language, but strict application of the definition above will provide us with consistent answers. Consider the next example. I've been in hot water, so often I feel like a tea bag. There are two places in two where we might raise questions about how many words are involved. I have, we know, has two parts and could have been written as I have, but an apostrophe is not a space, and so by applying the definition we formulated earlier, we can say that I have is one orthographic word. The same is true with tea bag and two. A hyphen is not a space, and we are thus able to say that tea bag is a single orthographic word even though it is made up of two parts. Thus what those parts are is a question to which we will return. Now let us turn to a different question with respect to one. How many different words does one contain? This question is often more difficult to answer because the answer you give will depend on whether you think cook and cooks, go and went are the same word or not. They are clearly different orthographic words. They have different forms or shapes, so we might say that there are 11 different word forms, orthographic words. In the cook was a good as cooks go and she went. On the other hand, there is another sense in which cook and cooks are forms of the same word. Let us use the term lexeme for this sense and say that cook and cooks are different word forms which belong to or realize the same lexeme. Similarly, go and went are different word forms which realize a single lexeme. There are two fewer different lexemes in one than there are word forms, so there are 9 different lexemes in one. The name by which we choose to refer to the lexeme is arbitrary and depends on the classification required in the general theory within which we are working. We could call the lexeme realized by Cook and Cook 762 or 85A and 75 for Samantha, but to make things easier, we will agree to call it Cook using capital letters when we write it. We can now say more succinctly that it was possible before that cooks is one of the word forms which can realize the lexeme cook. Similarly, we can say that went is one of the word forms that can realize go. The lexeme in one are the cook, be a could, as a go and she. We can look at the same facts and the same terminology from a different angle. Suppose you were reading a book and you suddenly came across the following sentence which you didn't understand. The possessed was disambigued from the Rehoboams. Suppose you didn't understand the fourth orthographic word in 3. You might want to consult your dictionary to find out what it means, but you would not look up disambigued with a final D in your dictionary because your knowledge of English is sufficient to tell you that disambigued is just a form of the lexeme disambigued. Similarly, you wouldn't look up Rehoboams, but Rehoboam, which is the name of the lexeme. Lexemes are dictionary words, not necessarily in the sense that they will be given a separate entry and act as a head word in the particular dictionary you happen to have on your shelf, but in the sense that you might expect the separate identity to be acknowledged in an ideal dictionary or the ideal dictionary that the speaker might have in their head. A lexeme comprises all the word forms which can realize the lexeme. Thus, the lexeme Rehoboam is sometimes realized by the word form Rehoboam and sometimes by the word form Rehoboams. The units which actually occur, which have a shape, whether that is an orthographic shape or a sound shape, are word forms. Word forms realize the present belong to lexemes. Lexemes correspondingly do not actually occur, but are abstract dictionary words, abstract in that each lexeme may comprise a number of possible forms. That lexeme is in a sense what all the word forms associated with it have in common. For the time being, we shall assume that the words forms of the spoken language are identical with the word forms of the written language, that is, with orthographic words. This is actually an extremely awkward point, and it will be taken up again in greater detail in chapter 4. We are now in a position to distinguish between the lexemes and the word forms in a sentence like one, but this will not always be sufficient for all purposes. Consider the next four sentences. Lee walked home, Lee went home, Lee has walked home, Lee has gone home. The word form walked occurs in both 4a and in 5a, and in both cases it realizes the lexeme walk. You walked, yet walked in these two sentences is not precisely the same elements, as we can see when we compare with 4b and 5b, which contain equivalent forms of the lexeme go. In 4a, walked realizes walk plus past tense, while in 5a it realizes walk plus past participle. We might want to say that walked in 4a and 5a are different words, even though they are homophones, word forms, and realize the same lexeme. We will say that there are different grammatical words. Grammatical words are defined in terms of their place in the paradigm and named by description, such as the past participle walk, which spell out a place. We now have three different kinds of words: word forms, including orthographic words, lexeme, and grammatical words. The word might seem to be rather a liability under these circumstances. However, it turns out that the amount of specificity in the three other terms is not always needed, and it is useful to have a superordinate term for word form, lexeme, and grammatical words. This allows us to avoid, when appropriate, the precision implicit in these other terms. In this book, word will be used with this less specific meaning. In the printed text, word forms are already separated out for us, but even if they were not, we would still be able to discover the beginnings and ends of words fairly simply. Indeed, ancient Greek was frequently written without gaps between the words, and this corresponds to the way in which we talk. There are no gaps between the words in normal conversation. If there were, schoolboy jokes, such as asking someone to say, "I chased the bug around the tree," or "I'll have this blood he knows I will," would not work, and neither would elaborate jokes like the following French couplet: Guillemot de l'Irin la tour magnanimie, Guillemot de la tour magnanimus, the queen's lover went, which was generous of him, gallantly from the arena to the magnanimous. The two lines in this couplet are or can be absolutely homophones, even though they mean different things because the word breaks come in different places, so there are no gaps between words in speech, and what we hear could be represented by running all the words together in print as a man become old, but they never become God. Even here it is relatively straightforward tasks for a speaker of English to sort out where the word forms begin and end. We do this because we can recognize patterns and carry out substitutions. Firstly, we recognize certain strings of letters or strings of sounds in the spoken language, which we know are found in other sentences with a meaning which would also make sense here. So we can recognize the sequence man because it also comes up in sentence like men are conservative after dinner. Men lose their tempers in defending their their taste. After 40, men have married their habits. In a similar way, we could isolate each of the word forms and notice that we might try to isolate the first two letters of 7 and we would find me in the other places, but then we would be unable to find the word begin and be. So firstly we can recognize recurrent sequence, but then even if we found a sequence which we did not recognize, we could substitute other things which we know are word forms in the place of these strings. So for man in 7 we could substitute people, lecturers, perennials and so on. In place of become we could have cat, hawthorn and so on, but we could not replace the m in man or man and 7 with a word form like weeps and still end up with a sentence. So substitution allows us to determine word forms. Before we leave words, we need to consider constructions like kick, the bucket tie or red herring. Irrelevant distraction. These look like ordinary syntactic constructions, but their meanings are not derivable from the meaning of the components elements, as would be the case which kick the ball or red paint. Such phrases are called idioms, and we would expect to find them listed in a dictionary where an actual book or an ideal mental facility. Idioms that share with lexims the quality of having dictionary entries. At the same time, an idiom like red herring seems to be made up of two lexims, each of which has its own dictionary entry. So while lexims are roughly defined dictionary words, they are not the only things that are found in dictionaries. This means we need different labels for things listed in dictionaries. Several such labels are found in the literature, including lexical items and listem. Lexical items in this sense include lexims, idioms, phrasal verbs in English, without equivalent to predicate proverbs such as a stitch in time saves 9 and possibly quotations such as to be or not to be. This is the question. 2.2 Elements smaller than the words. Now consider the following sentence. He was born stupid and greatly increased his birthright. We could isolate all the word forms in the sentence in the way outlined above, but we can also look at in the word forms and isolate recurrent forms within the word form. For instance, if we consider the word form birthright, we can divide that into two parts. For the first part, birth, we could substitute within the word forms things like copy and water. For the second part, right, we could substitute things like day, place, and rate. And similarly, we could divide the word form greatly up and into two parts. For the first part, great, we could substitute other forms like best and incredible, and within the word form, though not within the particular sentence, we could substitute items like ness or hast for lay. Again, in a similar way, we can divide increased into two portions, increased and the. For the first, we could substitute items like enlarge and minimize. For the second, items like s and ing. In other words, the same techniques that allows us to segment sentences into word forms also allow us to segment word forms. The units which we arrive at within the word forms we call morphs. A word form may contain only one morph, stupid and, or it may contain several, greatly, increased birth rate. In this book, the decimal point will be used to separate morph. A morph then is a unit which is a segment of a word forms. It has a constant form and realize this or is related to a constant meaning. Some morphs have the potential of being word forms on their own. And everyone lives by selling something. Everyone lives by selling something. This applies to the morphs. Everyone lives by selling something. Such morphs are called potentially free morphs.